So this is the first revision video for Unit 2 Finance for Business. There's two things that you need to know about this video. The first one, it's packed with lots of information. What I really want you to do with the video as you're going through it is, if there's anything that you think, I'm not 100% certain on that, or I'm really struggling with that, then use that as an opportunity to look on the internet. There's tons of stuff out there, good places to look at, GCSE Bite Size, Tutor to You. Try and have a look at a couple of different sources and try and work out, well, where am I struggling, what is it that I don't understand. Be a little bit of resilience, because when you're being that little bit of resilience, when you're really trying to work a problem out and you're really engaging your brain and really putting that effort in, that's the kind of thing that you remember, that's the learning that you remember. If however you really tried all that and you're really struggling, then the next day that you're in school, speak to one of your teachers and get them to give you a hand to make sure that there's none of this curriculum that you do not understand. The other thing I'd like you to do whilst you're watching the videos is really either check your revision notes and make sure you've got everything in, add to your revision notes, or possibly you'll be creating your revision notes from scratch. But either way, as we go through this video, I'll be telling you what, make some notes here, trying to get you to think about making sure you've got those revision notes. So in the line a few days before the exam, all you need to do is just read through those notes and just try and repeat and remember all that information. Finally, there's a few quizzes as we're going through. It's quite an interactive video, hopefully, and by interactive what I mean is, when we're coming up to a question, I'll tell you to pause the video, have a go with the questions, do your best with them, see what you've done, see what you haven't got right, and then again use that for going away and doing some further research and for some further work. This is the curriculum. This video is just covering topic A.1, which is understanding the costs. So you need to know startup, operating, fixed, variable, and you need to know this formula for total costs. Direct and indirect costs are not exactly the same as fixed and variable costs, although in the exam, if you are able to know that a direct cost is very similar to a variable cost and an indirect cost is very similar to a fixed cost, then you should be okay. And we've not discussed, and I won't discuss it in any more detail in this video. All the examinations so far have linked direct to variable and indirect to fixed. As long as you can do that, then you'll be alright. So, 4 types of costs that we need to know the definitions for: startup costs, operating costs or running costs, fixed costs and variable costs. So if you want to pause the video now, try and write down a definition for each of these 4 costs. So hopefully you paused the video, you wrote down 4 definitions, and hopefully the definitions look something like this. Startup, money spent before the business can start trading, start running, before it can open, something like that. Operating costs, the money spent regularly to keep your business running. Now it might say in the exam, give us what's the definition of a running cost, in which case you could say the money spent regularly to keep your business operating. So depending on which word they use, you can use the opposite, which is really handy. Fixed costs, costs that do not change no matter how much you produce. So yeah, things like rent, costs that don't change if we make more products. And variable costs, costs that do change if we make more products, such as raw materials is a really good example for that one. And while we're talking about examples, how many of you included an example for each definition? In the exam you can lose 50% of the marks, or one out of the 2 marks for a definition. Definitions, if they're worth 2 marks, are asking you for an example. So as we just did with variable costs, costs that change depending on how many you produce, e.g. raw materials. Not putting the example in will only get you 1 of the 2 marks. You have to put the example in to get the 2nd mark. So if you didn't do that, make sure that you're aware that that is something. These 4 definitions, if you haven't started your revision notes, take these down now. Possibly have a look on the internet and get some different definitions, but they will roughly say the same thing. But you can have a little read, see if some of the words on the other definitions might be easy for you to remember. But maybe take some revision notes now, or check that your revision notes have got these definitions and the examples. So our next slide is startup costs for a bakery. in the exam, you're not going to be asked what is a startup cost. It will always link it to a business. This is a vocational course. The BTEC course is vocational, and therefore it will always be startup costs of and a particular type of business, or startup costs for. So if you want to pause the video now and have a go at startup costs for a bakery, see if you can come up with maybe 3 or 4. So these are the ones that I came up with. These are the startup costs that I came with. So a bakery can't open without an oven. A bakery can't open if it needs a delivery van. You need to decorate the shop. You need to promote the opening through your advertising. You need a till, always my favourite startup cost. And you might need some deposit for a shop. So I came up with a few there. Maybe if you want to pause the video now, you can think about your notes, some examples of startup costs. You could also pause the video and try and come up with some startup costs for, let's say, a hairdresser. Try and come up with some startup costs for a newsagent. Come up with some startup costs for a supermarket, a mobile DJ, any particular business area. Try and come up with some startup costs for those business, and again, then add them to your revision notes. So maybe you want to pause the video now and try and make sure that you've got had a go at some of those tasks and added that to your revision notes. So hopefully we're okay with our startup costs now. Our next are our operating costs, also known as our running costs. So we're after these for a builder. Again, can you come up with 3 or 4? Pause your video now. So these are the ones that I came up with for a builder: wages, bricks, cement. To keep the business running, got to have the things that you're required to do the job. Advertising, promoting special offers, rent if you've got some premises, and insurance. Builders would definitely need some insurance in case anything went wrong. So thinking about your notes, have you got your definition of operating costs? Have you got some good examples of operating costs? If you haven't, pause the video. Also, have a think about pausing the video now, and can you come up with operating costs for some different types of businesses? So we're now on to our fixed costs or variable costs. So I've put 8 costs on here. Some of them are fixed, some of them are variable. So if we think about our definitions for fixed costs and variable costs, if you look back at your revision notes that you should have now. So fixed costs are costs that do not change depending on how many we produce. And variable costs do change depending on how many we produce. So pause the video now. Which of these are fixed? Which of these are variable? Did you get them all right? So wages, variable. The more we produce, the more wages we will have to pay. Salaries, fixed. Salaries are paid per year and then broken up into monthly payments, but it doesn't matter how much the worker produces, they will only get paid the same salary. Now, we've had this discussion in class lots and lots of times that actually some people who are paid wages don't get paid more the more they produce, but from the point of view of what they want to know for the exam, actually wages sometimes can be considered variable, and so for the purposes of the exam we will consider them a variable cost. Raw materials, the best example of a variable cost. You cannot make more tables without buying more wood for those tables, and therefore it is directly linked to how many you produced. Advertising, you could advertise and spend tens of millions of pounds on advertising and you could produce no items. It's not linked, and it isn't linked to how many you produce. Rent, your landlord doesn't care how many you produce, they still want the money every month. So you might be producing 0 products or you might be producing 10 million products. Doesn't matter to the landlord, they just want the agreed amount of rent. Insurance, same issue. You speak to your insurer and you say to them, okay, this is how much it's gonna, this is our business, and they'll say, it costs you £10,000 a year to be insured. They don't care then how many you produce. Packaging, well obviously, if you're producing more, you need more packaging for your products. Electricity for lighting the shop. So if you've got a shop and you've got lights on in the shop, that is a fixed cost, because it doesn't matter whether you had 0 people coming to your store that day or whether you had 1,000 people coming to your store, the lighting bill didn't change. Therefore, it's not connected to how many you produced. If we have a look at our next one, the final thing that you need to know is this equation. So what is the equation for total costs, or TC? So pause the video now and have a little go at this. So is this the equation that you got? Fixed costs plus variable costs equals those total costs. Hopefully that was the equation you got. A couple of exam practice questions. Which two of the following are the most likely examples of running cost for a small cafe? Select two answers. If you pause the video now and try and come up with these running costs. Okay, so hopefully you got the correct answers, which are D and E. So examples of running costs. Things that you need to buy whilst your business is operating. Now, I've put most likely. Some people might say that a new coffee machine, that actually whilst your business is up and running, you might need to buy a new coffee machine. Don't disagree at all, but we're thinking about most likely, and it may use this terminology in the exam, and it wants you to really think through the questions. So electricity for a toaster, you have to keep the toaster going if you want to keep your cafe going, and purchasing tea bags is something that you are going to be buying all the time, whereas a coffee machine is something that you will have bought before the business opened, and therefore most likely an example of a startup cost rather than a running cost. So just look out for questions like that in the exam. Our next exam practice question looks like this. So if you pause the video now and have a go at this. So what would the answers for this question look like? Here. So 100 mugs of tea, and the variable cost per item was £5. So for 100 mugs sold, the variable costs were 500. The fixed costs, they were 500, because it didn't matter whether it was 1,000 mugs or 0 mugs. The fixed costs do not change no matter how much you produce. And our equation, TC equals FC plus VC. So that gives us a total cost of 1,000. What would the fixed costs be if you sold 1,000 mugs? As I've just said, doesn't matter, the fixed costs are not connected to the number sold, and therefore it remains the same. So, if we skip back as opposed to forwards there, I'll just take you quickly back to the checklist at the beginning. Oops, there we are. So, pause the video now, using the checklist, have a look at your revision notes. Are you happy with all of the material which is in topic A.1? If there's anything that you're not clear about, make a note, bring it in to show to your teacher the next day. Possibly bring your revision notes in if you want them checking by your teacher too. And if there's anything that we can help with, then obviously bring it in. The next video will be topic A.2, which is talking about revenue.